What happens when the entire United States government is one bad afternoon away from going completely broke, and the only person willing to do anything about it is a single obscenely wealthy banker who doesn't even have to? Today, we're going over the two moments in American history when J.P. Morgan essentially became the government's emergency credit card, twice, and what it says about just how badly the whole system was held together with string and optimism. It's 1837, and John Pierpont Morgan is born into money. His father, Junius Spencer Morgan, is already a prominent banker, which means young Pierpont grows up understanding something most people never figure out. Money isn't just a thing you earn, it's a thing you control. He studies in Germany, works his way through the family banking connections, and by the time he's in his 30s, he's become one of the most powerful financiers in the country. He is not a warm man. He is not a particularly likable man. He has a severe skin condition that leaves his nose grotesquely enlarged and red, something he's deeply self-conscious about for his entire life. But none of that matters very much when you are the man who decides whether banks live or die. By the 1890s, Morgan has already assembled a financial empire that most people can barely wrap their heads around. He controls railroads, steel companies, and banking interests that stretch across the entire eastern seaboard. He isn't just rich, he is the kind of rich where other rich people nervously check to make sure he's in a good mood. The United States at this point has no central bank, no Federal Reserve, no government mechanism for injecting emergency cash into a failing financial system. What it has instead is a patchwork of state banks, trust companies, and private institutions that are only as stable as the confidence people have in them. And in 1893, that confidence evaporates almost overnight. The Panic of 1893 starts the way most financial disasters start, with a few things going wrong at roughly the same time. Railroad companies begin collapsing under mountains of debt. Banks that had loaned money to those railroads start wobbling. Depositors, seeing the wobbling, start lining up outside to pull their cash out, which causes more wobbling, which causes more lines. By the end of the year, 642 banks have failed. Roughly 16,000 businesses have gone under, and somewhere between 1 in 4 and 1 in 5 working Americans is unemployed. But the truly alarming part isn't any of that. The truly alarming part is what's happening to the US Treasury's gold reserves. In 1890, the Treasury held around $190 million in gold. By 1895, that number is approaching zero. Here's the thing about the gold standard that most people don't fully appreciate. If the Treasury runs out of gold, the government cannot honor its obligations. It defaults. And a defaulting United States government in 1895 isn't just a political embarrassment. It is a civilizational catastrophe that would send shockwaves through every financial market on Earth. President Grover Cleveland knows this. His people try to address it through Congress. They try selling bonds directly to the public, and none of it works fast enough. The gold keeps draining. So Morgan, who has been watching all of this with the patience of a man who already knows how it ends, demands a meeting with the president. Cleveland tries to avoid him. Morgan shows up in Washington anyway, checks himself into a hotel, and essentially refuses to leave until someone lets him in. When he finally gets his meeting, he tells Cleveland plainly that the Treasury could default that very day if nothing is done. Cleveland, out of options, listens. Morgan's plan involves an old Civil War-era statute that allows private parties to sell gold directly to the government. He and the Rothschilds agreed to deliver 3.5 million ounces of gold to the Treasury in exchange for a 30-year government bond. The deal works. The bleeding stops. Morgan then turns around and resells those bonds on the open market for an $18 million profit, which, as you can imagine, the American public receives with absolutely tremendous good humor. Morgan is already not a beloved figure. Now he's the banker who saved the country and charged the country for the privilege. The optics are not great, but the economy stabilizes, and that's the part that matters. Now, a reasonable person might look at all of that and think, okay, lesson learned. We should probably build some kind of institution that handles this sort of thing so we're not dependent on one wealthy man's generosity and pricing structure. And for a while, it seems like maybe that lesson has been absorbed. It hasn't. 12 years later, in the fall of 1907, the whole thing happens again. And this time, it's worse. The summer of 1907 is already rough. Several brokerage firms and businesses have gone under, and Wall Street is shaky. Then in October, the Knickerbocker Trust Company, one of the most respected financial institutions in New York, collapses. The stock market drops nearly 50% from its high the previous year. Depositors start running on banks across the city, then across the country. State banks, local banks, trust companies, they're all getting hit. The US Treasury pumps millions into the system to try to stop the bleeding, and it doesn't work. There's simply not enough firepower, and there's no mechanism to direct the money where it actually needs to go. Meanwhile, the one man who might be able to fix this is in Richmond, Virginia, attending a church convention. Because of course he is. Morgan gets the news and takes the first train back to New York. Arriving late on the night of October 19th, he goes directly to his private library on 36th Street and turns it into a war room. Over the next 3 weeks, he works through the nights alongside the heads of the most powerful banks in the country. James Stillman from National City, George Baker from First National, plus the Secretary of the Treasury, George Cortelyou, who shows up with a government checkbook and a fundamental problem. Nobody knows which banks can actually be saved and which ones are already dead. That's the brutal calculation Morgan has to make. You can't pour money into an institution that's going under regardless, because then you've just wasted the money. You have to figure out fast which ones are salvageable. I admire anyone who can make that call at 2 in the morning with the entire financial system on fire around them. He pledges $8.25 million of his own bank's funds to shore up competing institutions. Competitors, not partners, not allies, just other banks he's trying to keep alive for the good of the system. He coordinates a pool of cash from the major banks to shore up the trust companies. He personally calls in favors, arm twists reluctant executives, and keeps the whole operation running on sheer force of will. There's a moment that's become fairly famous. Brokers on the New York Stock Exchange are about to run completely out of money to fund their trades, which would cause a total freeze of the market. Morgan raises $25 million in 10 minutes by getting commitments from the major banks. 10 minutes, $25 million. By 1907 standards, that's an incomprehensible sum, and he does it in the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee. The exchange stays open. By mid-November, the worst of it is over. Morgan has personally lost around $21 million in the process, somewhere in the neighborhood of $550 million in today's money, because stabilizing the system meant making decisions that weren't good for his own bottom line. When the dust settles, the financial world credits him with having single-handedly prevented the collapse of the American economy. He is 70 years old. Even his critics, and he has many, can't quite find a way to argue with the outcome. But the thing that comes out of the 1907 panic isn't just gratitude. It's a much more uncomfortable question that everyone in Washington has been quietly avoiding. What happens next time, when Morgan isn't there? The answer takes 6 years to arrive. Congress passes emergency banking legislation in 1908. And then in 1913, after years of debate, the Federal Reserve Act is signed into law. For the first time, the United States has an actual central bank, a permanent institution with the authority and the resources to do what Morgan had been doing out of his personal library, on an ad hoc basis twice. Morgan doesn't live to see it become fully operational. He falls ill in early 1913 and dies on March 31st of that year, 9 months before the Federal Reserve opens its doors. He dies one of the most powerful and controversial figures in American financial history, a man who genuinely saved his country twice and made sure everyone knew exactly what it cost. When he died, his estate was valued at around $80 million, roughly $2.5 billion today. John D. Rockefeller, hearing the number, reportedly said, "And to think he wasn't even a rich man," which is either a devastating burn or a sincere comment on the scale of Rockefeller's own wealth. And honestly, it might be both. But here's what that quote misses. Morgan didn't measure wealth the way Rockefeller did, or the way Julius Caesar did when he weaponized $4 billion in debt to conquer the world, or the way Ray Kroc did when he quietly bought the land under every McDonald's on the planet. Morgan measured wealth in control, and twice in American history, when the entire financial system was about to collapse, the man with the most control was the only one who could stop it. That's a different kind of rich. If this story reframed how you think about power and money, hit the like button and subscribe. Every week we open another page in history's ledger, and the next story is one most people have never heard.